Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? This is my review of the Mammon series by Rob Cruzy. I've read a couple of series by Rob. I've even pimped a few series by Rob here on this channel. But this one might just be his magnum opus. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he finishes 10 more series before he dies and never writes anything better than this one. That's just how freaking good this one is. There are 3 books and an anthology, and in the interest of full disclosure, I have a feature in that anthology, but I'm not recommending this series because I've got a connection to it as far as bylines go. I'm not getting any royalties off of it. That's not why. This is just a really, really freaking good one. I just had the fortune of being in a Discord server with him and the other upstream authors as he was working through the brainstorming, the plotting, the scheming, and the outline of this entire series, and I got to see the notes for how the entire thing would play out. And then it was kind of cool to see how the trilogy developed and how it actually looked by the time he got it to print. For the most part, he was able to fulfill what his original vision for the series was. Let's get into that so you guys have an idea of what the heck I'm even talking about. So the pitch for the Mammon trilogy is as follows. When a billionaire tech genius finds a way to pull mineral-rich asteroids into Earth's orbit, he keeps the US government off his back by letting them in on the operation. The catch is that America's debt-laden treasury will tie its currency to the future of the asteroid mining efforts. But a saboteur steps in to throw a wrench in the works, and soon the world descends into chaos. I'm going to say right now that while this is a hard sci-fi, there are some very strong horror elements to it, but not supernatural horror. Rob might have invented the economic horror genre just by how gut-wrenching this was to read, because everything happening in it has happened before, just not with this level of technology. And for an extra kick to the nuts, I read the first book like a week before the whole Ukraine thing kicked off in 2022, and we started sending warehouses of cash over there to just light on fire and burn. That's kind of triggered the inflation spiral that we're in right now. It's not looking good out there, bros. It's not looking good. So here's the story. Our main character is a guy named Cade Kapoor. He's quite similar to Elon Musk in terms of his intellect, his upbringing, his ambition to get us into the stars, his fortune tied to the tech industry. There are plenty of other differences, but you can think of him as that kind of figure. He runs an aerospace company called Ad Astra. He's pushing the known boundaries of human capabilities in space, and his shtick right now is that they are lassoing asteroids and pulling them into Earth's orbit so that mankind can start space mining. He starts a company called the High Frontier Mining Corporation, I think is what it's called. But his timing could not be worse. The United States Congress just flipped to the asset-grabbing left, and Kapoor's company is at the top of the list for nationalization. They just figure, hey, as long as we can take control of everything, we can fix the economy. Because that's always how it goes, right? In order to hold off the 800-pound gorilla, he pitches a plan to the president. He says, attach the U.S. Treasury's future to a space mining operation that can grab asteroids whenever it wants, guaranteeing an ongoing supply of rare materials like cadmium and iridium, things that have an actual practical value and application for the tech industry, for EVs, for all kinds of stuff. Tying the future of the currency to that would then control the inflation that had thus far devalued the currency. This is all well and good, but no government likes to be challenged by a power it doesn't control. That's the whole reason they're pushing for nationalization of Ad Astra to begin with. During the process, Kapoor is double-crossed by a federal mole, and the High Frontier Mining Project is thrown into chaos. Without its success, the American economy crumbles overnight. Now, that's not the apex of the trilogy, but that's kind of the climax of the first book of Titan, and you see hyperinflation really kick off and just go absolutely haywire. Things get really ugly from there. The character breakdown is as follows. You've got Cade Kapoor. He's the son of an American woman and an Indian man who emigrated to the States. He's always had a sharp intellect, and due to his upbringing, he's had an inability to yield to bullies. He gets his start in software, and then he moves into aerospace engineering. Through these ventures, he meets a friend of his named Rami Esak. He's an Egyptian hacker. They are different in several key ways, Rami and Cade, but they share a similar drive and ideology. Esak becomes a key player in the success of Kapoor's ventures over the years. And this is where I will mention that this saga does span pretty much all of Cade's life. You see him as a child, you see him going through school and then graduating, getting married, all that stuff. But it doesn't drag. It's not a slog. Rob knows when to write the action scenes in detail or stop and explain things for the reader. And then he also knows when to kind of speed up the clock and say, okay, and then they did this and ground this. He's very good at giving you that seamless change of pace when you need it, so that you're not sitting there staring at your navel wondering when things are actually going to happen in the story again. You also meet Valerie Munoz. She's a childhood friend of Cade, who's kind of had a crush on him her entire life, even though he went on to success and to get married to someone else and stuff. She just kind of became this broke waitress in LA. She gets married, she has a daughter. Things are not great for her, but she's always been this girl who, oh, hey, yeah, I knew him once when we were kids, and then she kind of gets thrust back into his life at the end of the first book. And then there's another character named Davis Christopher. He's an early investor in Kapoor's genius, although he regularly warns him of the potential pitfalls of his ambitions. He's a mentor as well as an angel investor. Through Davis, and this is where we get one of the most important breakdowns of the series, because you see, I mentioned this has happened before in history, this whole hyperinflation thing when a scheme tied to the currency went wrong. He explains what's called the Mississippi scheme that bankrupted several investors in the 1720s. We're talking 50 years before the American Revolution, somebody tried something like this, and it took the entire set of colonies, not the nation, but the colonies, straight to hell. Kapoor's high frontier mining plan is scarily similar to it and of great interest to the reader. I don't necessarily want to compare Rob Cruzy to Michael Crichton, but there are some similarities in how he's able to teach the reader hard history, hard sciences, and hard economics with this book through the high-tech and high-paced sci-fi thriller that he writes. That's what makes these books so exceptionally valuable, is that in addition to being thrilling, exciting, and even sometimes terrifying, they are very informative. I've recommended this series in particular to a friend of mine who works in the tech industry and is a cryptocurrency advocate. Waiting to hear back from him just to hear what his take on it is. But Rob did his homework on this, and you can see on some of the blurbs on the Amazon page just the kind of endorsements that he's gotten from people who work in these fields and say oh yeah, no, he wrote it his homework. As for the setting, let's say that the key events of the story start in the 2030s, about 10 years ahead of our time. Although we do get regular flashbacks to Cade Kapoor's childhood in the early 2000s. Federal spending and the national debt continue to explode to the point where the U.S. Treasury is on the verge of insolvency. If it cannot meet its bond obligations, the American experiment is over, especially with China and Russia hovering and waiting in the wings. Overall, I would say that this is a world that is maybe 10% different from ours, due largely to time and technology. While the companies and people in the story are fictional, pretty much everything else is real and current, and that ought to scare you. The politics of the story are realistic to our world. Cruzy doesn't mix metaphors or use euphemisms for Republicans and Democrats. There are definitely more collectivists than conservatives in power, and they control the culture in this story even more than they do now in the real world. But as for the protagonists, the reader ends up cheering on the individualists who want to keep what they make. The enemy is the statist thief. We are treated to frequent monologues, but they're not preachy, by characters who understand the mechanisms of the economic collapse and how to lessen the impact that it has on those around them. Many times, this book shows itself to be an informative lecture on various topics like finance and public policy, and then puts it on a fake nose and glasses to carry on with the entertainment. Content warning, this whole trilogy does get the R rating. There is hard language throughout, but I think it's not done so excessively that it's it loses its sting, it loses its weight. I think with the people that he crosses paths with and the nature of the situation, I think it's only natural that people would get so distraught that that's where it would go. There is some explicit references and stuff, especially in the second book when Los Angeles in particular starts to just devolve into absolute chaos, and you see some of the things that people have to resort to in order to survive temporally and financially. I remember when COVID kicked off, and one of my friends noted that it was going to be especially devastating to young women if the economy didn't recover quickly. And you'll notice that right around then was when OnlyFans really started to take off, and more girls started exploiting their bodies for cash over the internet, because they felt it was a way to kind of circumvent the economic troubles of that time period. Boy, he wasn't wrong. Something like that pops up in this book, and it's way worse. There are allusions to those scenes, but you're never like in scene for them. There are a couple of like violent deaths and assaults and stuff, but I'd say the harshest part of it is the language. But as to who it's for, anybody with an interest in any of these fields, like Rob is really good at overlapping different interests into his books. So if you're interested in aerospace technology, cryptocurrency, economic policy, the minutia of a cultural collapse, of a governmental collapse, and how these things change, what kind of power structures would swoop in to fill the void. I will say that with how horrific this whole trilogy is, he does manage to stick the landing, because I don't think that you should just point a mirror at the horrific side of human nature and not show a way out of it. He does show a way out of it. The reason why this series is called Mammon is it's a reference to the scripture in the Bible that says you cannot serve God and mammon. No man can serve two masters. I've always thought that it was kind of interesting that the Spanish translation of that, in the Reina Valera translation of the Bible, it says that no puede servir a Dios y a las riquezas. You cannot serve God and riches. You cannot serve God and money. You can't love both of these things. And ultimately what drives everybody there is that the government loves money, the banks love money, other institutions love money. Cade needs money. He loves other things. He loves space travel and stuff. He loves the rugged individualism and the spirit of exploration. Money's just something necessary, and he proves that he can get it, but even that's not enough to satiate the appetite of the Federal Reserve and the people that have their hands in it. It is that love of money that destroys so many people in this book, that destroys entire nations, and you see so many different ways that takes place. It's not just the governmental collapse that pops up in the first book. There is also an aerospace disaster that ends up raining meteors down on the Earth towards the end of the second book. I'm not going to say anything beyond that, just because, like, as always, you need to read this trilogy. You need to, if you read the first one, I dare say you'll read all three, because you need to see how humanity is supposed to survive this beast. And I think the solution is very compelling and reassuring. That's pretty much all I want to say about it, because I don't want to give anything else away. This is most of what I've described here is about the first book. Excuse me. This book is highly relevant and informative. It takes a great deal of information that would otherwise be too dry to read, like a textbook, and it wraps it up with these characters that are admirable, characters that you want to root for and you want to see win. It did get my blood pressure up, but he stuck the landing, and boy, that's got to be a hard thing to do. As a final note about that anthology, about Mammon Collateral, I haven't read all the stories in it, but I've read a lot of books by the other authors who are in it who I haven't read in it, and that's why I give it a hearty endorsement. Fenton Wood especially, that dude is so smart. I've read a couple of his books, and he's just got brains for days. My story, called Double Crossed, was naturally about a trucker. One of the advantages of having Rob's outline for the entire series was that even though we hadn't read them all by that point, like, we knew where in the timeline we could put certain things. And so I wrote it from the perspective of a down on his luck and down on his finances truck driver who ends up getting tricked by the CIA into becoming a patsy in an operation that he has to kind of rely on his wits and his faith to get out of in Mexico. As for the character's name in that one, his name is Herb Harlock. It's kind of funny that this was right after I'd taken that 2-week work trip to Pennsylvania and worked with a guy who was from the Gulf Coast. He was from Louisiana. His name was Herb. And when I needed to come up with a character for this little short story, I was like, I'll put Herb in there. Herb was a cool guy that I got to work with for a week or two and hung out at Buffalo Wild Wings and stuff. Had a great time. So, Herb, if you're listening, I doubt you are. Nevertheless, you're in Double Crossed, my short story in Mammon Collateral. But yeah, go read this series. I'm pretty sure the second book, Messiah, made my best of year list for 2022. Nemesis, it probably made it for 2023. I can't remember at this point. I gave the second two books 5 stars each. I gave the first one 4 stars just because, like I said, when I put it down and then the whole Ukraine crap happened, I was like, ah! Here we are. But I cannot endorse this series enough. Go check it out. Mammon by Rob Cruzy. Titan, Messiah, and Nemesis is the trilogy name. That's it for now. Drive safe. See you out there.